Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of Board Games I Got Rid Of and Why. This is a series where I talk about all the games that have previously been in my collection but for one reason or another are no longer in my collection, and I try to give some rationale as to why I came to that decision, because often it's not as bad as it sounds. Before I get into these 10 games, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, keyender.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer here in the UK. They have some fantastic loyalty schemes, a great selection of games, and if you use my discount code in the show notes, you can get 5% off your first order. But without further ado, let's get on with the video. Okay, so the first game I'm talking about this episode is Robber Knights, which ironically featured on a top 10 list of mine recently. That is top 10 games that are low rated, that I still happen to like. So this one is not considered to be a great game, and it's actually by Odin, who is a very prolific and successful designer. And this one was, I did use one of the mechanisms that Odin is most known for, the idea of taking a stack of discs and dropping them off as you go, as you visit different tiles. And this one, you are basically trying to have majority or have the final piece on the stack of discs on each tile to claim victory points. However, it's very abstract in the way this game works, much more abstract than Dawn's other designs, as you can try and block people off, you can try and get the final piece on so nobody else can overlap you, and there's some good tile placement, there's some good strategy and some good forward thinking in this game. And in fact, if you like abstract style games, this is probably one of the best ones I've played. You know, I'm not a big fan of abstracts. The people I play with aren't big fans of abstract style games, so therefore these kind of games do not get to the table regularly, if ever, for me. But that being said, I can still really appreciate this game, and I really do feel like this has a huge untapped potential on people who had yet to explore this one and could enjoy it. So I think it's a shame it's not taken off as well as it could have, but I suppose you could call me a bit of a hypocrite because I haven't got it in my own collection, but that's because I cannot keep everything I play. And you know what, this one did stick around for a good time. I played it a good few times, way more than any other abstract game that I normally play. So in that respect, I got to give this one a lot of props, but ultimately wasn't quite right for me personally long term. The next game I'm talking about is A Feast for Odin, which I'm more than prepared to get a bit of backlash on, because this is considered to be one of Uwe Rosenberg's best game, if not his best game. So this is a huge sprawling style game, very, very sandboxy in the way it feels, as you can do pretty much anything here. Any mechanism you can think of is used in this game. Has some dice rolling, has a lot of kind of polyomino tile placement. But for me, the thing that stopped me really enjoying this game to the level that a lot of other people do, I felt this game lacked a bit of focus. I thought there was just too much going on. It was a bit too sandboxy for me, where I thought that if I was going to do one thing, I'm pretty much neglecting the whole other half of the game. I thought the card play was a little bit weak in it as well, and it felt a bit tacked on. And it just ultimately, I wasn't willing to invest that much time or effort into getting the most from this one. You know, this can kind of be a lifestyle game because there is so much to explore here, and it just wasn't quite a good fit for my personal taste. But I think even fans of A Feast for Odin can appreciate that if you don't like, you know, so many options or have that sandboxy feel, then they might even accept that this might not be the game for that style of gamer, which happens to be the style of gamer that I am. The next game I'm talking about is Circle the Wagons, which is actually a pretty nifty little button shy game. So you've got like 18 cards here. And it actually uses this kind of drafting system as you have 3 public objectives and you're trying to acquire these cards and have this kind of overlapping card puzzle where you're revealing and covering up symbols based on the layout and how you position these cards. I thought this game had a very cool mechanism in it where you could skip over as many cards as you want in this rundown to collect the cards you want, but anything you skip over goes to your opponent. And that can be used positively or it can be used quite negatively, as you might be giving them a bunch of cards that you know they can't handle and cannot lay out efficiently. So I thought that was a very clever design, and to be honest, the game in its entirety is well polished. Ultimately, the reason this one left the collection was because I don't get to play 2-player games that often. More often I'm playing at 3 or 4 players. The 2-player games I've acquired since and even before Circle the Wagons, I tend to enjoy a bit more. So if I'm going to play a 2-player game, I'm probably going to lean towards something like Hanamikoji or Mandala, or even something like Battle Line or Lost Cities. And I prefer all those games more than I prefer Circle the Wagons. Now that's no detriment to Circle the Wagons. I think it's a very good game, but when it's pushed that far down the totem pole, I just know I'm not going to get it played anytime soon. The fourth game I'm talking about is Kodachi, which is a strange hybrid kind of deck building, push your luck style game based with this kind of Japanese samurai feel. And the idea of this one is you're trying to overcome all these different enemies, either through strength or through stealth. And those are going to depend on the cards that you have in your hand. So if you have all low cards, you're probably going to go for stealth. If you have all high cards, you're going to go for strength. And all you're going to do is you're going to be revealing these enemy cards, trying to overcome them with the cards you have in your hand, and then deciding whether to stop or to continue. And if you stop, you can end up collecting currency and then buying new cards into your deck and getting points as you go. Pretty clever actually in the way it worked. The issues I had with this one was that it did feel a little bit convoluted, maybe tried a bit too hard to lean away from the luckier side of push your luck games. Also, I thought that it was a little bit too long, and this might sound silly, but the luck factor in this game was almost too much. Like often you would have a perfect hand of cards, you'd overcome a bunch of them, and it would just work out for you. Then sometimes you might have a great hand of cards, all low numbers, then all of a sudden there's one that's like a 0, that's almost impossible to overcome unless you have this very specific card in your hand, and then you'd automatically be forced to lose straight away, even though you were in a good position to start with. So that for me happened one too many times, and it ended up becoming a bit frustrating. And I kind of like to know what I'm playing with if I am playing a push your luck style game. I'd always lean towards something a bit simpler and just have that more visceral push your luck tension rather than trying to gamify it too much. The next game I'm talking about is Brussels 1897, which is the card game version of Brussels 1893. Now, despite being purely made up of cards, this is like a worker placement style game, as you are placing your workers, which are cards that come in different denominations of money, onto other cards based on these 4 different columns. And not only are you trying to collect the abilities by placing your workers on them, such as getting money or getting new characters to use, stuff like that, but also when you're placing these cards down, you're trying to get majorities in these columns, because whoever's got the majority in each of those columns gets another bonus. And on top of that, you're also trying to build up these shields, because when you place your workers, they all connect with each other, which can give you another kind of a sub-game within the main game, which I thought was a really interesting touch, and I'd love to see that explored more. There were, however, I thought some rushed parts of the game. For example, there was this building mechanism that I thought was very obtuse and it didn't flow naturally. And ultimately, I thought this game did have a bit of an identity crisis for me, because it was a bit too involved for a filler and a bit too long for a filler, because you're talking about maybe 45 minutes to an hour to play this one. But it was also like too short and not enough going on if you want like a main event experience. So those kind of games for me normally struggle to get to the table, because I normally want something really light, breezy and filler style, or I want my big crunchy heavy Euro. This one kind of laid in the middle of them, which meant that, again, I struggled to find where this would fit into my collection. The next game I'm talking about is Augustus, or Rise of Augustus, depending on the version you have. And this is essentially a gamified version of bingo, where all you're doing is you're drawing these tokens from a bag and allocating those symbols to the different characters that you've collected, and you're trying to match all the symbols as quickly as you can, because when you complete them, not only do you get victory points, you might also get a bonus which will help you complete the other ones as well. So it kind of has this domino effect where certain people will help you complete other ones. There's easy ones, there's more difficult ones, and you're trying to complete sets and get points in different ways. It's way better than it sounds on paper. You might think this is just bingo, and yeah, at the heart of it, it is. But there's just enough, just enough tweaks here to make it enjoyable, and I had fun with it. Is it going to be something that stays around forever? Clearly not, because I had my fun with it and I was ready to move on from it. But I still think that if you really like simple games, then you could get some fun from Rise of Augustus. But ultimately for me, it was one that I was happy to play and move on with pretty quickly. Next up, I have Cartagena, which is another game that I actually have enjoyed my time with. But ultimately it just didn't have the legs to keep me coming back to it. So this is a family-friendly, almost like a racing style game, as you have a bunch of these pirates who've escaped from jail, and you're trying to move them along this track by playing cards and matching symbols to get them to the escape boat. I love the level of player interaction in this game, as when you play certain symbol cards, you jump to the next available one. However, if somebody stood that on that symbol, then you jump to the next one. So sometimes if loads of people are stood on the same symbol, with one single card play, you can jump halfway or even 3/4 across the track with a single card, which is really interesting. It also has this kind of economy where you quickly run out of cards and then you need to start moving your people back along the track to acquire new cards into your hand. And that in itself is very puzzly. You want to block people off and slow them down. You want to capitalise on things when the board is kind of in your favour with the cards you have in your hand. And there's a lot to be had here. Very streamlined, very few rules. Again, for a family-friendly game with still some interesting decisions, this is a very good option. I played this one a good few times. I've had successes with it. I think the best way to play it is shortening the map to keep it nice and snappy. But as I said earlier, I think once you've got this out of your system, you've played it a few times, there really isn't that much more to explore, but I still thought it was good for what it was. So that is Cartagena. The next game I'm talking about is Spirit Island, which is another immensely popular, successful co-op game. This one is considered to be one of the best designs out there, and you know what? With my objective head on, I can't disagree with that. There's nothing about this game that I can criticise or critique in terms of its gameplay functions, the way it works, how clever the design is, how asymmetric all the different god powers are that you can use, and how well they work and synergize with each other. It really is a mind-blowing design. I think it's brilliantly executed. However, for me, the best way to play this game is purely solo, by just having one god and doing it all by yourself and trying to map out this puzzle and how to kick out these these invaders and how to shift things around the board. But bearing in mind this game is designed to be played solo, I thought it became a bit too confusing when playing with other people. I kind of wanted to do my own thing and not worry too much about what anybody else was doing. But to do well at this game, you need to work together and you need to synergize your powers with each other. And I wasn't quite willing to put in the work to do that. And if I was to play this purely solo, it would never get to the table because I very rarely play solo games. And if I do play solo games, I normally lean towards something a bit simpler and a bit faster. So it was another one of those games where I just knew there was never going to hit the table. To be fair, I didn't really scratch the surface with this one. I played it a few times. This one requires a lot more effort to get the most from it because it is so deep, it is so complex and rich. And I can completely see why this is a lot of people's favourite game because it is genius. And especially for like co-op games, there's so much to explore here. But for me, co-op isn't really my forte, neither are solo games. And for that reason, it wasn't right for my collection, so therefore it had to go. The second to last game I'm talking about is Watch, which I have to admit is one of those games that had me most intrigued over this last year or so. Has an awesome theme or concept where you are working in a watch factory, however secretly you are also manufacturing these war munitions. So definitely out there. It has a great kind of aesthetic as well, this kind of propaganda style art. I really wanted to like this one. However, I think mechanically and game wise, it just was a little bit short of the mark and didn't quite reach up to what I wanted from it. So this is essentially like a rondel style game. You're moving your worker and can take an action spot as long as it's empty. You are kind of putting gears, you're getting these munitions, all of which to invest in final scoring. And that was one of the things that detracted for me was how confusing the scoring was at the end. It was quite maths heavy and it became a bit too much to try and manage in your head. Additionally, there was a concept here that I thought sounded great on paper where there was a worker placement spot you could go to where you could almost try and guess where other people would go in the following round. And if you guessed correctly, then you'd have to accept a bribe or take a bribe from them. So I had that kind of getting into your opponent's head and trying to predict what they were doing. However, in practice, that did fall a bit flat. Nobody really seems to go there or really seem to care about that part of the game. And it became a bit of a game of going through the motions and just, building things, selling things, and so on. And also the area majority in terms of the scoring was a bit too dry. It was a bit too transparent. And it wasn't really much fun or variability to be had. So wanted to like it. I just thought it was a little bit flat and didn't do anything terribly special. And the final game I'm talking about this episode is Torres, which is actually a former Spiel des Jahres winner, all the way back like in the year 2000 or so. This is a pretty abstract game as you're trying to build up these huge castles, and you're building up these castles not only by increasing the footprint of them, by spreading it wide, but you can also stack these pieces vertically. And what you're trying to do is not only increase these towers, you are trying to move your player pieces onto these towers, because your scoring is going to be the size of the tower multiplied by how high up your worker is on that tower. So it has a really cool scoring concept that I thought was probably my favourite part of the game. It almost had this action points allowance system, which Kramer and Kiesling were known for. And I thought this game is another objective, solid design. But it kind of goes back to my thoughts on abstract games just not gelling with me. And I thought this game was good. I had a lot of fun with it. I played it quite a few times. I thought there was some good variants in it as well, as you use these action cards to kind of mess with the rules a bit. And I can certainly see why this game is so highly respected, because it's another one of those games where, can I critique the rules? Not really. These designers are genius. The game design is fantastic, but it doesn't quite fit my tastes. If there ever was an abstract game I would have in my collection, this might be it. If you like games like Santorini, where you like that kind of 3D aspect and table presence of a game, then this is a really good one to check out, because it scales well, it plays pretty quickly, lots of interesting decisions. You could be a bit nasty with it, but it was never coming off my shelf. And if I was going to play a Kramer or Kiesling game, there are so many I'd play ahead of this one. But if I had infinite space in my collection, I probably would keep hold of this one, because I think it's definitely got its place. And I really do appreciate the design. But ultimately, I have to be cutthroat, and it had to go. So there we have it. Those are another 10 games that I have left my collection. If you have enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other videos too. But for everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.